Hello friends and welcome back to my channel. On a different day, a very special Tag Tuesday, I'm doing the Reader Problems book tag. I was tagged by Mason from Mason in the Dark, and I will have his video linked down below. You should definitely go watch it. And I did try to find the original creator of the tag, but I couldn't do so. It looks like the video has been unlisted since it was created. The first question is, you have 20,000 books on your TBR. How in the world do you decide what to read next? I go off intuition a lot. I just look at the book titles and I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna read that next. I also, if I'm having a hard time deciding what to read next, I will read the first line or the first paragraph of a book, and if it intrigues me, I'll read that next. But I make monthly TBRs. And I make those based just on like, this is what I'm in the mood for, or this sounds good, or I just read the earlier book in this series, so I want to continue on with the series. And I stick to those pretty religiously. So once I make my TBR for the month, I'm pretty good. This also can be answered by the holds I get in from my library, because as soon as I get an audiobook hold in from my library, I know what audiobook I'm reading next, because I need to get through them before they go back to the library. Question 2 is, you're halfway through a book and you're just not loving it. Do you quit or are you committed? I quit. I am not a completionist in that sense at all. I DNF books if I'm not enjoying it. Question number 3 is, the end of the year is coming up and you're so close but so far away in your Goodreads reading challenge. Do you try to catch up, and how? Yes, I try to catch up. I try not to put too much pressure on myself with the challenge, but I do try to catch up to meet my reading goal. And I do this by reading graphic novels and manga. And also audiobooks, because audiobooks I can listen to while I do other things, like while I'm driving or while I'm walking to class or things like that. So I go heavy on the audiobooks, because then I can multitask. Question number 4 is, the covers of a series you love do not match. How do you cope? This is an interesting question because I don't feel like I've come into this problem very often, but there are a couple solutions I'm thinking of. The first one, audiobooks. It doesn't matter as much if the covers don't match if you're listening to the audiobook or an ebook. So either of those things are great options. If I had the physical copies of like the first 2 and then they switched for the third one, depending on how much I enjoyed the series, like if it was one of my favorite series of all time, I would rebuy the first and second book to match. If it's a series I don't care as much about, it doesn't bother me. Like, I have a middle grade series that I started reading years and years ago, and then I didn't finish it when I was younger, but once I got out of high school, I wanted to finish it because I wanted to know how it ended. And they switched the spines more so than the cover for this series, but they switched the spines of the series so that they didn't match. But it's not one of my favorite series of all time or anything like that, so I just deal with it. It doesn't bug me that much. But as I mentioned, if it was like one of my new favorite series, like if it was the Wayfarers series by Becky Chambers, and I had like the first book in the US editions and they switched the covers, I would go back and rebuy the first book. Question number 5 is, everyone and their mother loves a book you really don't like. Who do you bond with over shared feelings? And the answer is probably not really anyone. Most of the time when I have found that I don't like a book that everyone else loves, I just kind of don't talk about it all that much. This actually feels very applicable because I don't really like Brandon Sanderson. His writing style just doesn't really work for me. But pretty much everyone I know loves Brandon Sanderson. And almost every time we get together with my husband's family, they end up talking about Brandon Sanderson and how much they enjoy his books. And I just sit there and nod and listen. And I don't bond with anyone over the fact that I don't like his books. I just kind of zone out until they start talking about a different book. Question number 6 is, you're reading a book and you're about to start crying in public. How do you deal? I go into the bathroom. That's probably what I'm going to do. I'm going to make a quick detour to the bathroom. Most of the time that I'm reading in public, I'm listening to an audiobook, and a lot of the time I'm outside because I'm walking between classes. I'm like on campus walking between classes or studying outside when the weather is nice or just like relaxing. So if I'm outside and I'm wearing sunglasses, and especially if I have a mask on, like I had to wear a mask every time I was on campus last semester, I can just cry. No one will see. It's fine. But most of the time I'm probably going to try to go to the bathroom, turn off the book, and be like, okay, I gotta finish this later when I'm at home. Question number 7 is a sequel of a book you loved just came out, but you've forgotten a lot from the prior novel. Will you reread the book, skip the sequel, try to find a synopsis on Goodreads, or cry in frustration? It depends. It really depends, but most of the time I'm going to reread the book. Because if I loved it that much the first time, rereading it will be a treat. I'm actually debating on rereading a book that I read earlier this year because the sequel is coming out / just came out a couple days ago, and I really want to read the sequel, but I'm not sure how much I remember from the first one. So I'm thinking about rereading the first book, even though I just read it earlier this year, because I loved the book so much. I think I remember most of it, but I want to be sure before I go into the sequel. I definitely do not have an issue with rereading. I really enjoy rereading, so in this situation, I'm definitely just going to reread the first book. Even if I remember a lot of stuff, sometimes I reread the first book. Question number 8 is you do not want anyone borrowing your books. How do you politely tell people nope when they ask? Boy, oh boy, I'm real bad at this. Every time someone has asked me to borrow a book, I've said yes, and it leads to regret. There are a couple times I regret letting people borrow books. Luckily, we're to a point where people do not ask us to borrow books. My husband and I both read a lot. Both of our families read a lot, but because of everyone's reading preferences, like I have a brother-in-law who only reads ebooks, and my dad only listens to audiobooks. They never ask me to borrow books, so that is really nice. And most of the time people, at least in my life, don't say, hey, can I borrow that book? They say, hey, I'm really interested in reading this book. What did you think about it? Do you own a copy? And when they say things like that, I just say, yes, I do own a copy and I loved it, and leave it at that. Most of the time, they're too shy to ask to borrow it, and there's no way that I'm volunteering because I've had too many books come back in terrible condition or just not come back at all. That is how I get around it, is if they ask leading questions, I just don't lead them where they're wanting to go. Question number 5 is reading ADD. You've picked up and put down 5 books over the last month. How do you get over your reading slump? There's a couple things that I do for this when I'm feeling kind of slumpy, which honestly doesn't happen that much for me, but I reread some of my favorites, like The Night Circus, which I think is my favorite book of all time. So rereading really helps me. I read manga and graphic novels because I can get through them in an afternoon, and that's really nice. But also, if I'm feeling slumpy, I just give into it. And I'm like, okay, I don't want to read right now. What do I want to do? Because I don't want to force myself to read. This isn't supposed to be a chore. This is supposed to be something I do for fun. So if I'm not finding it fun, then why do it? I actually have kind of like an annual slump towards the end of the year. The last couple years, December has been my worst reading month of the year. And I just kind of give into it because there's other things I want to do with my time. And always, I come back around to wanting to read again. So I personally don't feel the need to fight the slump. I just ride it out. Question number 10 is there are so many new books coming out that you're dying to read. How many do you actually buy? This depends on my financial situation. So currently I'm on a book buying pause. I don't really like the word ban, but I'm on a book buying pause because my work situation changed. So there will be a lot of new books coming out that I want to read, but I might end up buying one of them just because I don't know what's going to be happening with my work situation, and I got to be careful. On the other hand, when things are a little bit more steady or more stable, I do subscribe to Book of the Month, so I get at least one new release every month. This is honestly my main way of learning about new releases. I do hear about some of them here on BookTube, but I'm really terrible at retaining and learning about new release information. But most new releases I actually don't buy. I get a lot of stuff from my library on audiobooks. So if there's a new release that I'm interested in, I check my library's audiobook catalog first. And then if I can't find it, if I'm still really interested in it, I'll maybe look into buying it. But I actually get most of my new releases from Book of the Month, because when I go to a bookstore, I mostly buy backlog stuff. Question number 11 is, after you've bought the new books you can't wait to get to, how long do they sit on your shelf before you get to them? This depends on the book. So sometimes when I buy a new book, I read it as soon as I finish the book I'm currently reading when I buy it. This is like especially true for series that I'm loving. When I'm buying the next book in the series, I'm like, as soon as this comes in, I'm reading it. But on the other hand, I have some Book of the Month books that are from last year that I haven't read yet. One of my goals for this year actually though is to get through at least all of my books from Book of the Month from last year. I don't want to have any 2020 Book of the Month picks sitting on my shelf by the time 2022 rolls around. So it really does depend on the book. All of the books that I buy sound interesting. It just depends on how much it captures my attention when I first hear about it, and if I keep thinking about it. Because if I'm still thinking about it a couple days later, I'm going to pick it up sooner than if I read the synopsis, it sounds interesting, I put it on my shelf, and then I kind of forget about the synopsis. If that happens, it's probably going to sit on my shelf for a while. That is the Reader Problems book tag. As for tagging people, I'm going to tag Katrina Reads and Rachel's Reading Nook. So I'm very excited to see what you two do with this tag. Thank you so much everyone for watching. Go ahead and like this video and subscribe to my channel if you want to, and I will see you in my next video.